The enemy commander laughed when he heard the Americans were coming. He laughed, lit a cigarette, and told his men to hold the ridge. "Let them come," he said. "Let them climb. We will bury them in the fog." He had done this before. He had watched other teams break against these mountains. He was certain, absolutely certain, that no one alive could touch him at this distance. He was wrong about one thing. He didn't know she was already there. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The mountains didn't care who you were. That was the first thing every soldier learned when they were assigned to high-altitude operations in the kind of terrain that existed above 8,000 feet in the remote ranges of the American West. Terrain so severe, so indifferent, so genuinely hostile to human presence that it felt less like a location and more like a judgment. The mountains didn't care about your rank. They didn't care about your training. They didn't care about the medals on your chest, or the years you had put in, or the number of deployments stamped into your service record. They cared about nothing. And that was exactly what made them the perfect place to fight a war that officially didn't exist. Commander Luke Mercer had been in enough of those wars to stop counting. He was 41 years old, built like a man who had spent 2 decades proving something to a world that hadn't asked him to, and he carried himself with the specific kind of quiet authority that only comes from having been the one who didn't break when everyone around him did. His face told stories he never spoke out loud. The scar along his jaw was from Fallujah. The way he paused before speaking was from something that happened in a valley in Afghanistan that was never officially documented. He led his SEAL reconnaissance unit the way good commanders always lead, from the front, with his voice low and his decisions faster than his doubt. Tonight, his unit was 6 men moving through fog so thick it had texture. You could feel it against your face. You could breathe it in. It wasn't mist, it was a living thing, shifting and pressing between the pines, swallowing sound and light and distance with equal enthusiasm. The kind of fog that made you feel like the world had shrunk to the 10 feet around your own boots, and everything beyond that was hypothesis. "Hawk, give me position," Mercer said quietly into his radio. Hawk was Petty Officer Danny Reyes, 29 years old, from El Paso, the unit's navigation specialist, a man with an almost supernatural relationship with topographic maps. He had a gift for terrain that the others occasionally described as borderline unsettling. "We are approximately 400 meters from the secondary ridge," Reyes said, his voice controlled professional, though Mercer had known him long enough to hear the tight thread of tension underneath. "Compound Valley is another 600 below that. We're on schedule." "What's our communication window?" "Sketchy. Elevation is killing the signal. We're getting maybe 40% reliability on the secure channel. Weather isn't helping." Mercer exhaled slowly. 40% was manageable. 40% was not ideal. There was a very wide gap between those two positions, and he lived in that gap for a living. Behind him, the rest of the unit moved in near-perfect silence. Staff Sergeant Jonas Brickley, the largest man on the team, impossibly quiet for his size, carried the heavy support equipment. Petty Officers Caleb Torres and Marcus Webb moved in tandem, the way partners develop over years of shared near-death experiences. Sergeant First Class David Okafor, the unit's medical specialist, brought up the rear. 6 men, 1 objective. The compound in the valley below was believed to house a commander, a high-value target whose operational reach had cost lives in 3 different countries. The intelligence was solid. The timeline was critical. The window for extraction was narrow. Everything else, the fog, the altitude, the communication interference, the weight of the night itself, was just the terrain, just the mountain, just the indifferent machinery of the job. Mercer checked his watch. 23:14. "We keep moving," he said. They kept moving, and somewhere above them, somewhere in the dark, somewhere in the fog, somewhere so far up the mountain that the air was thinner and the silence was different, and the world below looked like nothing at all, someone was already watching. Captain Elena Ward had been in position for 71 hours. She had eaten twice in that time, slept in fragments of 40 minutes, never more, the way she had trained herself to sleep light enough to wake instantly, deep enough to keep the body functional. She had drunk from a collapsible water system she carried in a modified pack that weighed exactly as much as it needed to, and not 1 ounce more. She had moved 3 times in 71 hours, each repositioning a careful calculation of angles and sight lines, and what the fog would do at different temperatures throughout the night. Her mission had a single line of objective text in a document that very few people had ever seen, and fewer still were authorized to read. Silent overwatch? Mapping and documentation only, no engagement, no contact, no presence. She was not under any definition of the word supposed to be known. She was supposed to be the kind of soldier that the enemy never knew existed, the kind whose value came entirely from invisibility. She was a classified long-range surveillance asset operating under an independent command structure that sat entirely outside the SEAL unit's chain of awareness. Mercer didn't know she was there. His team didn't know she was there. The forward operating base that had dispatched his unit knew she was in the region in the way that you might know there is weather coming, generally aware, specifically uninformed. She was 27 kilometers of mountain and fog and dark sky away from anyone who might try to explain her. Ward was 34 years old. She had grown up in eastern Montana, the daughter of a man who had taught her to read wind before she could drive a car, and who had told her once with the particular earnestness of a man who knew things other people didn't. Elena, most people look at distance and see a problem. Learn to see it as a room. She had never forgotten that. She had built her entire professional identity around it. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall, lean in the specific way of people who burn everything they consume in the service of operational readiness. And she had the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable in ordinary social situations. Because it was the kind of stillness that suggested she was always doing something with her attention that you couldn't see. Right now, what she was doing with her attention was logging the movement patterns of 3 individuals on the northern ridge. She had first acquired them 14 hours ago, faint disturbances in the fog line, the kind that the untrained eye would read as wind effect or shadow play. Ward's eye was not untrained. She had watched them for 4 hours before she was certain. Then she had spent the next 10 hours building a picture. 3 operators, trained, patient, communicating through some system she hadn't fully identified yet, possibly hand signals through the fog breaks, possibly low-power radio bursts too short to triangulate easily. They were positioned in a modified, staggered formation across the northern ridge, controlling something like 800 meters of elevated terrain. They had fields of fire that covered every approach to the compound valley below. They were not random hostile fighters. They were a long-range denial unit professionally placed, professionally handled. And they had been there before Mercer's team arrived. Ward's jaw tightened fractionally when she processed the full meaning of that. The SEAL unit was walking into something that had been prepared specifically to receive them. She pressed her eye back to her scope. The fog shifted. For approximately 4 seconds, she had a partial sight line to the middle position on the ridge. She noted the angle logged. It calculated the distance, 2,040 meters. She did not fire. Her mission was overwatch and documentation. She was not cleared for engagement. She watched the position resolve back into fog, and she continued to breathe steadily, and she continued to catalog everything, and she did not fire. Not yet. It came without warning, which was how designed ambushes always arrived. The warning was the shot itself, and by the time your nervous system registered the sound, the decision had already been made by someone else on your behalf. The crack was distant enough to be strange, to sound almost abstract, like a door slamming in a house 2 streets over. The effect was not abstract. Petty Officer Caleb Torres went down hard on his left side, his hand going instantly to his shoulder, a sound escaping him that was not a word and not a scream, but something caught between the two. Contact. Webb was already moving, already pulling Torres toward the tree line, his hands working with the automatic efficiency of a man who had done this before in the dark. Mercer was flat against the ground with his rifle up before Torres had finished falling, his eyes scanning the ridgeline and finding nothing, just fog and dark and the suggestion of pine trees and the absence of any useful information whatsoever. Sit rep, he said, his voice absolutely level. Torres is hit, Webb called back. Shoulder, he's conscious, I have him. Okafor on Torres now. Mercer was already moving laterally, trying to change his angle, trying to get something, any kind of sight picture on where that shot had originated. The ridge above them was a black smear against a dark gray sky. 2,000 meters of vertical geometry in the darkened fog, and somewhere inside it, at least one person who could see them better than they could see anything at all. Reyes, Mercer said, tell me where that shot came from. Reyes had his equipment up running calculations. Northern ridge. Based on the angle of impact, Teresa's wound is consistent with incoming fire from roughly 20 degrees above horizontal. He paused. Commander, that puts the shooter somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 meters out. The number landed in the fog like a stone into deep water, 2,200 meters. Mercer's rifle had an effective combat range of 800 meters in optimal conditions. In this fog, in this darkness, at this elevation, half that. Less. He lowered his weapon for exactly 1 second and let himself understand the tactical geometry. Then a second shot came. This one struck the rock face 2 feet to his left, and he felt the impact as much as heard it, a sharp percussion of fragmenting stone chips of granite stinging against his arm. He moved without thinking, rolling behind a larger rock formation, breathing hard. They're ranging us, Reyes said. The tension in his voice was no longer hidden. I know. Commander, we cannot engage at this distance. We have no... I know. There was silence in the radio net for a moment, the kind of silence that a team falls into when the tactical situation has exceeded the parameters of the briefing and everyone is waiting for the person at the top to produce an answer from somewhere. Mercer looked up the mountain. He looked down the mountain. He looked at his team Webb holding Torres against the tree line, Okafor already working on the shoulder wound. With quiet competence, Brickley flattened behind a rock with his rifle, trained on nothing useful. Reyes running calculations that couldn't solve the fundamental problem. He was a good commander. He knew exactly what a good commander was supposed to do here. And what a good commander was supposed to do here was admit quietly and without drama that the solution was not inside this unit. All positions maintain cover, he said into the radio. Do not engage. We have no shot. Then from the fog behind him, from the slope above the tree line, from a direction that none of his team had been watching, because none of his team had any reason to believe that direction contained anything, came the sound of careful footsteps. Deliberate, unhurried, moving with complete confidence through terrain in the dark. Brickley spun first, his rifle coming up. Contact rear, hold. Mercer's hand came up fast. The figure that emerged from the fudge was not what any of them expected. She was moving with the loose economy of someone for whom this mountain was not a challenge, but simply a surface. Her rifle, a long, custom-configured weapon that Mercer's tactical eye cataloged instantly as a precision long-range platform, something far beyond standard issue, was slung across her back. Her hands were visible. Her movement was controlled. Her eyes, even in the dark, were tracking angles. She stopped 7 meters from Mercer. She looked at him. Not through him, not around him. Directly at him with the flat, calibrating gaze of someone who had already assessed the situation fully and was now waiting for the relevant parties to catch up. She said, I've got the distance. 4 words. Mercer stared at her for a full 2 seconds, which in combat time was the equivalent of a long conversation. Who are you? He said. Ward. Captain Elena Ward. I've been on this mountain for 3 days. I have eyes on your shooters. She was already moving past him toward the rock formation he had been using for cover, her head turning slightly to take in the team's positions with a single sweep. You have 3 long-range denial operators on the northern ridge. They've been positioned there for at least 18 hours. They knew you were coming. Mercer moved with her because something in the architecture of her certainty made moving with her seem like the most rational available action. How do you know that? Because I've been watching them since last night. She stopped, set her rifle down across the rock surface with the practiced care of someone handling something she trusted completely, and put her eye to the scope. Stay down. They're between fog breaks right now, which means their visibility is as bad as yours. But they're patient. They'll wait. Torres, Mercer said with the particular emphasis of a man communicating multiple things in a single word. Ward's eye came off the scope for exactly 1 second. She looked at Okafor working on Torres. She looked back at the ridge. If they wanted your man dead, he'd be dead, she said. That was a positioning shot. They're trying to fix your unit in place. She paused. It's working. The bluntness of it hit the team like a flat object. Brickley made a sound that was not quite a word. Webb muttered something quiet that was probably profane. What do you need? Mercer said. Ward settled back into her position. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of long practice-making adjustments that Mercer couldn't fully track small mechanical movements that he recognized as the language of someone calibrating for very long distance. Right now, I need everyone to stop moving and stay in cover. The fog is breaking in a pattern roughly 4 to 7-second windows, approximately every 11 minutes. They've been timing their shots to those breaks. She paused. Which means I can too. Mercer processed this. You're going to shoot back. I'm going to remove the problem, she said quietly. There's a difference. At 2,200 meters, possibly more on the far position, I haven't finalized the ranging on the third shooter. She glanced at him sideways briefly. Is that going to be an issue for you? Mercer thought about Torres. He thought about the second shot 2 feet from his head. He thought about 6 men trapped on a mountain by 3 shooters they couldn't see, couldn't reach, couldn't do anything about except wait to be killed in sequence. No, he said, that's not going to be an issue. Ward turned back to her scope. Then stay down, she said, and be quiet. I need to listen to the wind. What happened next was unlike anything Luke Mercer had experienced in 18 years of special operations work, and he had experienced things that would require significant paperwork to describe. Ward went still. Not the careful stillness of a trained soldier managing their movement to minimize exposure. Real stillness, the kind that exists in objects rather than people. The kind that made Brickley, who was watching her from 4 meters away, with his rifle held uselessly in his hands, lean toward Webb and whisper in a voice so low it barely existed, "Is she breathing?" Webb watched her for a moment. "I think so," he whispered back. She was tracking. Mercer understood this, intellectually understood, that what was happening behind those eyes was a continuous computation, a running analysis of variables that most human beings never think about. Simultaneously, wind speed, wind direction, wind shift patterns through the mountain channel, temperature at elevation versus temperature in the valley, the pressure differential, the fog behavior. The physics of a bullet traveling at supersonic speed through air that would work against it in at least 4 different ways over 2,000 meters of flight. He had met snipers before. He had worked with some of the best marksmen in the military. He had never seen anything quite like this. She said they knew we were coming, Reyes said quietly from Mercer's left. How? She said they have been there since last night, which means the intelligence was compromised. Or the compound has its own surveillance network in the high ground, and they made us on approach. Mercer kept his voice low. We deal with that after. Right now we deal with this. And you trust her. Mercer thought about the question for exactly as long as it deserved. I trust what I can see, he said. And what I can see is that she came out of this mountain like she owns it, and she knows things about those shooters that she can only know if she's been watching them for hours. He paused. That's enough for right now. Reyes nodded slowly. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he stayed down and he stayed quiet. Okafor appeared at Mercer's shoulder. Torres is stable. Through and through missed bone, significant tissue damage, but manageable. He can move when we need him to. Good. Commander? Okafor's voice dropped even lower. Who is she? She says she's been on this mountain for 3 days on independent overwatch. Okafor looked at Ward's still form. He looked at the mountain around them. He calculated something in his expression. Alone, he said. Alone, itrusteno. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said, with the tone of a man deciding to file certain questions for later processing. Ward's voice came without her moving. 11 minutes and 40 seconds since the last shot. We're coming up on the next break window. Her voice was completely flat. No emotion, pure information. I've identified the primary shooter's position. He's been in the same spot for the last 3 breaks, which tells me he's either very confident or he's not as well trained as the others. And the others, Mercer asked. The second shooter is mobile. That's the dangerous one. The third I haven't fully pinned. He's being careful. A brief pause. I'm going to take the primary in the next window. Mercer felt something move through the team, a collective tightening, a shared intake of breath that never actually became audible. 6 combat experienced operators who had collectively faced more hostile fire than most military units would see in a generation, and they were tense. Because 2,000 meters. Because fog. Because she had been on this mountain alone for 3 days. What do you need from us? Mercer asked. Nothing, Ward said. Exactly nothing. Don't move. Don't shoot. Don't talk on the radio. If he hears an echo from down here, he might shift position. She paused and prayed that the fog does what it did 4 hours ago. What did it do 4 hours ago? Reyes asked. For the first time since she had appeared from the mountain, something moved in Ward's expression that was not pure tactical data. It might have been the ghost of something like a smile. It gave me exactly what I needed, she said. Then she went completely still again. Mercer checked his watch, 23:47. He looked at his team. He looked at Torres, pale but conscious, watching Ward with an expression of focused attention that suggested he had decided the best use of his remaining alertness was to observe whatever happened next. He looked at the northern ridge, which was fog and dark and nothing and 2,200 meters of distance that his best weapons could not cross. He looked at Ward and he waited. The mountain breathed around them. The fog moved in its own logic. Somewhere up on that ridge, 3 trained operators were waiting for their next window, confident in their elevation, confident in their distance, confident that nothing below them could touch them. The wind shifted. Mercer felt it on his face, a change in direction. Subtle, the kind of thing you notice and then immediately forget in ordinary life. Ward noticed it and did not forget it. Her right hand moved, a single small adjustment to something on her rifle. Then she was still again. And Mercer, watching her, had the strange and absolute conviction that whatever happened next had already been decided not by them, not by the men on the ridge, not by the Bong or the mountain, or the mission, or any of the variables that felt so impossibly stacked. It had been decided by her hours ago in the dark, before any of them even knew she existed. That was the thing that stayed with him longest afterward. Not the shot, not the distance, not any of it. The thing that stayed with him was the understanding that she had already won this before he arrived. He just hadn't known it yet. She had. The fog opened, her finger moved, the mountain held its breath, the shot had not yet landed. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, the 3.1 seconds between the moment Ward's finger moved and the moment anything happened. 3.1 seconds where the bullet was somewhere in the dark, somewhere in the fog, crossing 2,000 meters of mountain air at a speed that physics allowed but instinct refused to believe. 3.1 seconds where every man on that slope was holding something inside his chest that was not quite breath and not quite prayer, but existed in the space between the two. Mercer counted without meaning to. 1, y'all. He watched the ridge, yes. 2, he watched Ward. She had not moved. Her eye was still at the scope. Her body was still as carved stone. 3, he watched the ridge again. Then a sound came down the mountain. Not a sharp crack, not the dramatic percussion of a Hollywood action sequence. A distant, compressed thud, the kind of sound that a very large thing makes when it stops suddenly, when momentum becomes impact. When 250 grains of precision-engineered metal reaches the end of its journey and delivers everything it was sent to deliver. And on the northern ridge, in the brief gap that the fog had given them, a shape that had been there was no longer there. Mercer stared. The fog closed again. Nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time. It was Webb who broke it, and he broke it in a whisper so stripped of its usual confidence that it barely sounded like him. Did she just... Confirmed hit, Ward said. Her voice was the same, exactly the same. No elevation, no satisfaction, no nothing. Pure data delivery. Primary shooter is down. I'm scanning for the second. Brickley made a sound. Later, he would deny making it. It was the sound a person makes when their understanding of what is possible gets quietly and permanently rearranged. Mercer realized he had been holding the muscles of his shoulders in a configuration that was not sustainable, and he let them drop slightly. He looked at Ward, who was already moving, not physically, but her attention was moving her scope, tracking across the ridgeline in careful increments, reading the dark reading, something the rest of them simply did not have the equipment to see. Second shooter repositioned after the first shot, she said. He's smart. He moved before the sound reached him. How do you know he moved if you can't see him? Reyes asked. Because I know where he was, and the fog is behaving differently there now. She paused. Weight displacement changes the ground cover. Even at this distance in fog, there are tells. Reyes turned and looked at Mercer with an expression that communicated something complicated. Mercer kept his voice steady. Torres, how are you doing? Still here, Commander? Torres's voice was tight with pain, but functional. Okafor had his shoulder packed and his arm stabilized. I'm watching. He stopped, started again. I've never seen anything like this. Nobody has, Okafor said quietly, and he was not the kind of man who said things like that casually. Ward shifted her position by approximately 6 inches. Not a dramatic movement, an adjustment, precise, and considered the way you move a chess piece when you've already seen 10 moves ahead and you're simply executing the plan. Third shooter, she said. I've been tracking his pattern for the last 14 hours. He's the most disciplined of the three. He hasn't fired yet. She paused. That bothers me. Why, Mercer asked. Because a disciplined operator who hasn't fired yet is either waiting for a specific trigger or he's the spotter for someone else. Another pause. If he's a spotter, there's a fourth person I haven't located. The temperature of the air between Mercer's team members changed. Brickley slowly, carefully began scanning the opposite ridge, the southern approach they had come up. His hands were calm, his eyes were not. You said there were 3, Mercer said. I said I identified 3. There's a difference. Ward's voice remained level. I've been operating under the assumption that my count is complete. I'm no longer comfortable with that assumption. So there might be a 4th shooter. There might be a 4th shooter. Mercer took a breath. Where would you place him if you were them? Ward was quiet for 4 seconds. When she spoke, her voice had a different quality, not slower but more deliberate, like someone choosing each word from a very specific set of options. If I were them, I would put my 4th operator below the ridgeline on the eastern slope, far enough from the 3 visible positions that any response to the first 3 wouldn't naturally orient toward him, close enough that he controls the valley approach. She paused. Which is exactly where your team would move if the ridge fire stopped. Mercer processed this. He processed it in approximately 2 seconds, which was how long it took for the geometry to fully arrive. They were not just pinned, they were being directed. The shots from the ridge weren't simply suppressive fire. They were steering. They were pushing Mercer's unit toward a specific approach path, the same path that a 4th operator would be waiting on unseen below the ridgeline, with a clean field of fire into anyone who thought the ridge had been suppressed. They want us to move east, he said. Yes, Ward said, so they can kill us in the approach. Yes. Mercer turned to his team. He looked at each face in sequence. Brickley, whose jaw had tightened to the point of visibility. Webb, whose hand had moved to Torres's arm in a way that was protective and probably unconscious. Reyes, who was running numbers in his head that Mercer could almost hear. Okafor, whose expression had settled into the specific neutrality of a man preparing himself for whatever came next with or without permission. Nobody moves east, Mercer said. We hold position. Understood, Brickley said immediately. The others echoed it. Ward spoke again, and there was something in her voice now, something that was not quite urgency but was adjacent to it. I need you to understand something. The fog cycle is changing. The windows are getting shorter, not longer. Temperature is dropping, which means the fog is densifying. Within the next 20 to 30 minutes, I'm going to lose the sight lines I have. She paused. Whatever I'm going to do up here, I need to do it in that window. What are you going to do? I'm going to end this. She said it the way a person says something they have said before many times in many different contexts, in the quiet of their own mind. Not dramatically, not with weight, just as a statement of the most likely available outcome. The 2nd shooter first, she continued. He's mobile, which makes him my priority. Once he's down, the 3rd will either hold position or try to withdraw. If he withdraws, he'll expose himself. If he holds, I'll take my time. And the 4th, Reyes asked? The 4th is yours, Ward said, looking directly at Mercer for the first time since she had put her eye to the scope. If I'm right about his position, once I start engaging the ridge, he's going to have a decision to make. Either he holds and waits for your team to walk into his fire, which you won't do, or he adjusts. And when he adjusts, he'll move. And when he moves in this terrain, in this fog, he'll make sound. She looked at Brickley. You, she said. Brickley blinked. Me. You're the largest person on this team, and you've been the quietest, which means you're good at controlling your movement. I need you oriented south-southwest below our current elevation, listening. Not watching. Listening. She turned back to her scope. When I fire the 2nd shot, he's going to do something. If he's going to move, that's when he'll start. You'll hear it before you see it. Brickley looked at Mercer. Mercer nodded once. Brickley repositioned without a sound, moving south-southwest with an economy of motion that was Mercer thought genuinely impressive for a man his size. He settled into a new position and went still and began to listen. 12 minutes had passed since the first shot. The fog was doing what Ward said it would do, pressing lower, thickening at the edges of visibility, compressing the world. Mercer could feel it changing. The air was colder than it had been 20 minutes ago. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Second shooter has settled," Ward said. "He thinks the first shot was random. Or he thinks the shooter is repositioning. Either way, he's given me something." A brief pause. "He moved to a position that has a better angle on your team, which means he's oriented toward you, which means his back is to you." More or less, something moved in her voice. Not quite dark humor, the cousin of it. "He made a mistake." "The best ones always make mistakes," Mercer said, and he didn't entirely know why he said it, except that it was true and the situation seemed to call for truth. "Yes," Ward said, "they do." She went still again. The fog shifted. The mountain breathed. Mercer's watch said 0007. And then Ward said very quietly, "He just stopped moving." "Is that good or bad?" "It means he found a spot." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "It means I found mine too." The team held the collective tension of 6 people who understand exactly what is about to happen and have no role in it except to stay out of the way and let someone better positioned than them do the thing only they can do. Mercer thought about his career. He thought about 18 years of operations, 18 years of decisions made fast in bad conditions with incomplete information and the weight of other people's lives in the equation. He thought about the thing that nobody puts in the training manuals, the thing you can only learn by surviving enough situations where you shouldn't have the ability to recognize cleanly and without ego, when the right move is to hand the problem to someone who can solve it better than you. He was a good commander because he had learned that. Not everyone did. Ward fired. The sound was significant, sharp, directional, the acoustic signature of a large caliber precision weapon in a mountain environment, carrying in ways that rifle fire in open terrain doesn't carry. It rolled off the slopes and came back, changed the echo, or arriving a beat after the original in a way that briefly confused the auditory system. 2,100 meters. The fog was already closing. Mercer looked at the ridge. He could not see impact. The fog had the ridge again. 4 seconds of silence. Then Ward said, "Hit." And from the southern slope below them, from the direction Brickley was now facing, there came a sound. It was small. It was brief. It was the sound of a boot on loose shale in the dark, the kind of sound that disappears immediately and leaves you questioning whether you heard it at all. Brickley's voice came through the radio net at almost 0 volume. "I have something." Every member of the team stopped breathing. "Say again," Mercer murmured. "Movement, southeast, maybe 70 meters down the slope." Brickley's voice was controlled in the way of a man applying significant effort to keep it that way. It stopped, but it was there. Ward's head turned slightly from her scope, not away from it, just enough to recalibrate her awareness. "He's repositioning. He heard my second shot and he's trying to find a new angle. He'll move again in 30 to 45 seconds when he thinks he's safe." "Brickley," Mercer said. "I'm on it." Brickley said, "I'm on it." The seconds moved. Mercer counted them without meaning to, the same way he had counted during the first shot. Some things the human brain does automatically in crisis situations, and counting is one of them, as if by marking the passage of time, you maintain some theoretical control over what it contains. 30 seconds. Nothing. 35. Nothing. 40. The sound came again. Shale. A shift. Weight on uncertain ground. Brickley fired twice. The slope went quiet. Not a slow quiet. An immediate quiet, the specific quiet that arrives when movement stops because the thing that was moving can no longer move. Nobody on the team said anything for a full 4 seconds. Then Webb, who had been holding Torres against the tree line with his arm around the man's good shoulder, said in a voice that was almost completely level, "Brick." "Yeah," Brickley said. There was something in that single syllable, not triumph, not satisfaction. The sound a person makes when the thing they were afraid of resolves in the direction that means they're still alive. "Yeah, I've got him," Mercer exhaled. "Confirmed?" he asked. "Confirmed," Brickley said. Ward had not moved from her scope. "Third shooter is still on the ridge," she said. "He knows what's happening now. He heard Brickley's shots." She paused. "He's making a decision." "What decision?" Whether to run or fight, another pause. He knows I'm here, or he knows someone with a long rifle is here. The question is whether he knows exactly where. Does he? Ward was quiet for 3 seconds. No, she said. If he knew exactly where I was, he would have moved already. He knows the direction. He doesn't know the position. She shifted her rifle by a fraction of a degree, which gives me something. You're going to wait for him to give himself away, Reyes said. I'm going to let him believe he's solving the problem, Ward said. People who believe they're solving the problem tend to expose themselves. It's a universal constant. Torres made a sound from the tree line that might have been a laugh muffled by pain in Okafor's hand and the general impossibility of the situation. Mercer found himself experiencing something that he did not immediately have a word for. Not admiration exactly, though that was present. Not relief, though that was there too. It was something more structural than either of those things. The feeling of watching someone operate so completely within their capability that it redefines your understanding of what a ceiling looks like. He had thought he knew what elite performance looked like. He was revising that understanding in real time. Commander Ward said, and her voice had shifted again back to that quality of deliberate word selection. Yeah, I need to ask you something. Ask. Your original mission objective, the compound, the timeline. She paused. What is your extraction window? Mercer checked his watch. We have approximately 4 hours before the extraction window closes. And you need the ridge clear to advance. Correct. Then I need you to be honest with me about something. She said it straight the way she said everything, no softening, no rhetorical approach. If I take the third shooter in the next window, which may come in the next 4 to 6 minutes, your path to the compound is open. But your team is down one operator. Your communication is degraded. You have an injured man. She paused. What's the call? Mercer looked at his team. He looked at Torres, who was looking back at him with an expression that said very clearly, don't you dare use me as a reason to abort this mission. Commander, don't you dare. He looked at Webb, who gave him nothing, a deliberate nothing. The expression of a man who has decided his commander doesn't need his opinion right now, just his readiness. He looked at Brickley, who had returned from the south slope and was watching Mercer with the steady patience of a man who will follow his commander into whatever the commander decides and whose eyes say that the commander will make the right call and whose entire posture communicates absolute confidence in that fact. He looked at Reyes, who nodded once. He looked at Okafor, who simply said, Torres can move. Torres said, Torres can absolutely move. Mercer turned back to Ward. We continue, he said. Ward didn't respond immediately. She was tracking the ridge. Then she said, okay. And before Mercer could say anything else, before anyone could take another breath or adjust another position or think another thought about probability or risk or the mathematics of what was happening on this mountain, at midnight in the fog, Ward said, window, and fired. The shot traveled. The mountain accepted it. The third shooter on the northern ridge would later be described in no official report as having been eliminated at a confirmed distance of 2,130 meters in a fog window of approximately 3 seconds by a single round fired from a position so far removed from standard tactical engagement parameters that the after-action analyst would spend 3 days arguing about whether to include it in the documentation or simply note the outcome and move on. Ward already had her rifle slung before the echo finished coming back. She turned to Mercer. Ridge is clear, she said. You have your window. She looked at the compound valley below them. She looked at the team. She looked at the fog, which was doing exactly what she had predicted, thickening, pressing lower, restructuring the world around them into something denser and more complicated. I'm moving to secondary overwatch position, she said. I'll be above you for the advance. You won't see me. Mercer believed her completely. What is your radio frequency? He asked. She told him. He programmed it into his unit and confirmed reception. She was already moving, already turning back toward the upper slope, already becoming part of the mountain again. The fog accepting her. The way fog accepts everything that moves slowly enough and quietly enough to deserve acceptance. Mercer watched her go. She was gone in 11 seconds. Not gradually, not in stages. There and then gone, the mountain closing around her like a hand closing around something it has held before and knows how to hold. Brickley appeared at his shoulder. Commander, he said. Yeah. What do we call her? Mercer looked at the ridge. He looked at the slope. He looked at the fog. He thought about the 3 shots across 3 impossible distances in a window that physics was generous to allow. He thought about 71 hours alone on a mountain. He thought about a woman who had solved this entire problem before his team arrived, who had been waiting patient, invisible, inevitable for the moment when what she could do became exactly what was needed. Right now, Mercer said, we call her our advantage. He turned to his team. Saddle up. We're moving to the compound. Keep your intervals and stay off the eastern slope. He looked at each of them in sequence. Let's finish this. They moved. The fog closed behind them. And above them, somewhere in the dark, somewhere in the mountain, Elena Ward was already in position. She was always already in position. That was the point. They moved in the kind of silence that only comes from teams who have trained together long enough that communication has migrated below the level of language. Mercer at point. Reyes behind him, navigation running in his head like a second heartbeat. Brickley carrying the weight that nobody else could carry, moving with that impossible quiet. Webb and Torres in tandem. Torres moving as promised, though the effort of it showed in the angle of his jaw and the way he breathed through his nose in long, controlled pulls. Okafor at the rear watching everything behind them that the others had stopped watching. 6 men moving down a mountain toward a compound that held 20-plus armed hostiles and 1 high-value target whose elimination was the reason all of them were here. And somewhere above, invisible, undetectable, ready in position Ward. Mercer had programmed her frequency and confirmed it twice. The radio was silent. He did not expect her to check in. He had understood within the first 10 minutes of knowing her that she would communicate exactly when she had something to communicate and not 1 second before. He found this more reassuring than he expected. The trail down to the compound valley was not a trail in any conventional sense. It was a series of decisions made in real time about where to place a boot, how to transfer weight, which rocks would hold, and which would slide, executed in the dark, in the fog, by men who were tired and running on adrenaline, in the specific brand of focus that comes from knowing that stopping is worse than continuing. Reyes touched Mercer's shoulder. Once. Their signal for stop. Mercer stopped. The team compressed behind him in sequence, each man reading the man in front of him, the chain of communication traveling backward in silence. Reyes leaned close. His voice was barely vibration. Structure. 200 meters. I'm picking up heat through the scope. Mercer raised his own optic. The compound was not what intelligence had suggested it would be. Intelligence had described a fortified structure, reinforced walls, elevated watch positions, generator-powered lighting. What Mercer was looking at was all of that and something else, something that the satellite imagery had not conveyed because satellite imagery doesn't capture atmosphere. The compound was alive, active, alert. They knew something had happened on the ridge. They've gone to heightened readiness, Reyes murmured. Look at the movement patterns. That's not normal compound security rotation. They're responding to something. The shots, Mercer said quietly. They heard them. 3 shots spread across nearly 20 minutes from the ridge where their own operators were positioned. And now their operators aren't checking in. Reyes paused. They know their ridge team is gone. Mercer took a long breath. He had planned for a compound that believed it was protected. He was approaching a compound that knew it wasn't. This was a different problem. Ward, he said quietly into the radio. 3 seconds of silence. Then her voice compressed and clear. I'm here. Compound is on alert. They made the ridge shots. A pause. I see it. They've pulled 2 additional positions to the outer wall. Northeast corner and the western gate. Another pause. They're not sure what happened. They're scared, which makes them dangerous, but scared people also make mistakes. How many total on the perimeter? I count 14 visible. Another 6 to 8 I can't place, probably interior. A brief pause. The watchtower northeast just got reinforced. 2 men where there was 1. Mercer ran the numbers in his head. The numbers were not comfortable. 20-plus hostiles now alert in a fortified compound with his team down to effective strength of 5. The math of direct assault was not survivable. I need options, he said. Ward's response came without hesitation, and that lack of hesitation told him something told him he had been running this calculation since before he reached her frequency. 3 nodes. If those 3 positions are removed simultaneously, the compound's defensive architecture collapses inward. They'll spend 3 to 4 minutes trying to understand what's happening before they can coordinate a coherent response. A pause. That's your window. Simultaneously, Mercer repeated. I can only fire one shot at a time, Ward said. So simultaneously means fast. The window between shot 1 and shot 3 needs to be under 60 seconds. After 60 seconds, the surviving positions will adapt. How close are those 3 positions to each other? Watchtower is 1,400 meters from my current position. The roof gun emplacement is 1,600. The western cluster is the problem, it's 1,750, and there are 3 men in close proximity. I need to take the cluster last because I'll need a second round if they scatter after the first. She paused. I can do it in under 50 seconds if the fog holds. If, Reyes said, and Mercer held up a hand. If, Ward acknowledged, the fog is going to do what the fog does. I've been reading it for 3 days, and I can tell you what it's likely to do. I can't tell you what it will do. Best estimate, 3 seconds of silence that felt longer than 3 seconds. 78% confidence the window holds for 90 seconds. Long enough. Mercer looked at his team. 78% was not a guarantee. 78% was also, in his experience, better than most of the operational confidence windows he had been handed in 18 years of this work. We go on your first shot, he said. The moment we hear it, we move. Don't wait for the second. Don't wait for confirmation. Understood, Ward said. Give me 4 minutes. I need to adjust position. You have 4 minutes, the radio went quiet. Mercer turned to his team and relayed the plan in 11 words. It took 11 words because there was nothing about it that required more. The team absorbed it. Brickley cracked his knuckles once his one involuntary tell, the thing he did when he had accepted the risk of what came next and was transitioning from preparation to execution. Webb checked Torres again, a quick hand on the shoulder. Torres shaking his head fractionally. I'm fine, stop checking. Reyes ran the approach geometry one more time, his lips moving slightly. Okafor checked his kit with 2 practice touches. 0036. The 4 minutes stretched. Mercer had long ago made peace with a particular quality of time that exists in the space before action. It moves differently. It has texture. Every second feels like it contains more than a second should contain, and the mind, unable to tolerate pure waiting, fills the excess space with every possible version of what comes next. The good versions, the bad versions, and the specific versions that exist only in the territory of worst case, and that the professional mind learns to acknowledge and then set aside without dwelling. He thought about Torres's shoulder. He thought about the compound commander inside those walls, a man whose decisions had cost lives in 3 countries, who had been careful enough to last this long, who was right now probably receiving reports from his outer security and trying to understand why his ridge operators weren't answering. He thought about Ward, 71 hours alone on a mountain, moving only 3 times, eating twice, sleeping in fragments, mapping and watching and calculating and waiting with the patience of someone who understood in her bones that the moment she was built for would arrive when it arrived and not before. He thought about what it costs a person to be that, not the training. The training was understandable. It was the architecture of competence, and Mercer respected architecture. He thought about what it costs in the quiet places of a person's life to be the one who is always apart, always above, always unseen. To exist professionally as the person that no one knows is there until the moment they are exactly necessary. He didn't know Elena Ward. He had spoken to her for less than an hour, but he recognized something in her, the specific signature of someone who has chosen something at a very deep level and is not confused about the cost. He respected it. He was also very glad she was on their side. 0040. His radio clicked twice. Not speech, 2 clicks. Ward's signal. She was in position. She was ready. He looked at his team. He held up one finger. Get ready. Then pointed toward the compound. Every man in his unit tensed in the specific way of people who have been told to sprint and are waiting for the starting signal. The fog moved. The mountain breathed. And then Ward fired. The shot was different from the ridge shots closer, lower, in the mountain, carrying differently in the valley acoustics. Mercer was moving before the echo finished, the team surging behind him with the collective forward momentum of people who have been compressing energy for 4 minutes and are now releasing all of it in one direction. Inside the compound, chaos arrived instantly. Mercer heard it shouting the specific edge in the voices that signals genuine confusion rather than coordinated response, the sound of men who have lost something important and are not yet sure what it was. The watchtower northeast was the first shot. He didn't see it happen. He was running. Second shot came 14 seconds later. The roof gun emplacement. The compound noise change quality got louder, then fractionally more directionless. The shouting losing its geographic focus as the men inside tried to process two simultaneous data points. Their outer positions were being eliminated by something they couldn't locate, and now something was moving toward their walls in the dark. 41 seconds, third shot, the western cluster. Then a fourth shot 3 seconds later that nobody on Mercer's team had planned for and that they learned about only afterward. Ward had seen one of the cluster men beginning to raise an RPG, had made the calculation in under 2 seconds, and had taken the shot without announcement because there was no time for announcement and because she did not need permission to do her job. Breach point, Mercer said, his voice operational flat. Go. Brickley hit the compound wall first, not through it, around it, using the gap that Ward's elimination of the western cluster had opened the 3 men who had been covering that approach now being no longer a factor. Mercer went through behind him, Webb and Torres stacked and moving, Okafor and Reyes following with the efficiency of a team that has drilled this movement until it lives below the level of conscious thought. The compound interior was exactly as chaotic as Ward had predicted. Men were moving in the wrong directions toward where they thought the threat was, which was the walls, not understanding yet that the threat had already entered from the gap. Communication had broken down between the interior and the outer positions because the outer positions were no longer communicating. The compound's defensive architecture, designed around a perimeter that no longer existed, was now a liability rather than an asset. Men in fixed positions with fields of fire pointed outward, unable to quickly reorient. The next 4 minutes were not something Mercer would describe in detail to anyone who didn't need to know. What he would say afterward in the language of after-action reports was, the team moved efficiently through interior resistance. What that meant in the language of what actually happened was that his 4 effective operators moved through the compound with the controlled violence of people who are very good at a very specific thing and who are currently being asked to do exactly that thing under conditions that are difficult but not impossible, and who are also acutely aware that somewhere above them, someone is watching every external threat and removing it before it becomes their problem. Because that was the other thing happening during those 4 minutes. 3 times during the compound breach, Mercer's radio ward's frequency clicked twice. Warning signal. And each time within seconds, a sound came from outside the compound walls that was a shot, and the thing that had been moving toward a position from which it could interfere with the breach was no longer moving. She was clearing his perimeter while he cleared the compound interior. She was managing the exterior situation alone from a position nobody could locate, eliminating threats that his team didn't even have eyes on yet, not responding to requests, not waiting for coordination, just reading the situation and solving problems before they became problems, the way a chess player 3 moves ahead doesn't wait to see if their opponent does what's expected. They've already accounted for the variations. 0107. Webb's voice on the internal net. Eastern block 2 tangos neutralized. Brickley, interior corridor clear. Okafor, I need someone on my position. Locked door north structure. Mercer was there in 12 seconds. The locked door was a reinforced interior room, the kind of construction that says something specific about what is inside it. Breach, Mercer said. Brickley breached it. Inside the room, 2 guards and 1 man who was not a guard. The man who was not a guard was seated at a table. He had the look of someone who had been seated at the table since the moment the chaos started, not cowering, not attempting to flee, but seated as if he had decided that his dignity was the last thing he controlled, and he was not going to surrender it. He was approximately 60 years old. Silver at his temples, the kind of face that belonged to a man who had spent decades making decisions that other people had to live and die with. He looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at him. Commander Hassan Khalid, Mercer said, reading the face against the intelligence photograph he had memorized 3 days ago. The man said nothing. Stand up, Mercer said. Slowly. Khalid stood slowly. 0114. Wart, the Mercer said into the radio. Objective is secured. HVT is in custody. What's my perimeter? Ward's voice came back immediately. You have 3 hostiles still mobile in the eastern section of the compound. I can see them through the watch position gap, but I don't have a clean angle without risk of structure penetration. A pause. Do you have eyes on them from inside? Reyes was already moving checking angles. I can get there, he said. Go on, Mercer said. 3 minutes later, the eastern section was handled. 0119. The compound went quiet. The specific quiet of a space that has been loud and chaotic and is now neither of those things, not peaceful because peace is something different, but still resolved. The acute phase of the thing had ended, and what remained was the administrative reality of what came next, securing the objective, confirming status, preparing for extraction. Mercer stood in the compound's central courtyard with Khalid secured and his team around him, and he felt the particular weight of a mission objective achieved, which does not feel like triumph. Triumph is for afterward, for when you're somewhere safe and the distance has given the thing a shape you can hold. In the moment, it feels like the sudden removal of a pressure you had stopped noticing because you had been carrying it so long. He pressed his radio. Ward's frequency. Ward, compound is secured. Objective in custody. What is your status? A pause. Active, she said. I have 1 remaining mobile hostile at the northern approach. He's heading away from the compound. Withdrawal, not tactical retreat. Another pause. I'm going to let him go. Mercer raised an eyebrow at this, then immediately understood it. A man running away from a failed mission was already done. A man killed while running away was a martyr and a data point. Ward was making a judgment call that was not strictly within the parameters of her engagement authorization, and it was exactly the right call. Understood, he said. Can you confirm outer perimeter is clear for extraction prep? Confirmed, she said. You're clear. Mercer exhaled. He looked at his team. Torres leaning against the compound wall with his shoulder packed and his face the color of old paper but his eyes clear and present. Brickley, who was doing a sweep of the northern interior with the systematic thoroughness of a man who checks his work. Webb, who had found a position with sight lines on the compound entrance and was not going to leave it until he was told to. Reyes running communication checks trying to get the signal quality up for the extraction call. Okafor moving through the space with his kit open, doing the thing that Okafor always did after an engagement, accounting for everyone confirming status, the quiet arithmetic of survival. What's our casualty count? Mercer asked. Torres is our only WIA, Okafor said. He's ambulatory. He's going to need surgical attention within 8 hours, but he's stable. We're all walking out, Mercer said. We're all walking out, Okafor confirmed. Torres said from his position against the wall, told you I could move. Webb said, nobody argued with you, Torres. Torres said, you were all thinking it. Brickley appeared from the northern interior and said, clear? And then looked at Mercer with an expression that said everything he wasn't going to say out loud about the last 90 minutes. Mercer nodded at him. Some conversations happen entirely in facial expressions between people who have been through enough together that words are optional. 128. Mercer pressed Ward's frequency again. Ward, extraction window opens in 2 hours 40. We're staging for departure. What's your plan? The pause that followed was longer than her previous pauses. Long enough that Mercer felt the edge of something, not concern exactly, but attention. The kind of attention you give to a silence that might mean something. Then she said independent extraction. Different timeline. Mercer frowned. Negative, you're coming out with us. Another pause. Commander, my extraction parameters are separate from your operation. I report to a different command structure. My timeline isn't yours to set. Ward, he kept his voice level and direct. You just supported a combat operation that succeeded because of your direct action. You eliminated, he paused, doing the count, at least 9 confirmed hostiles and provided continuous overwatch through compound breach. You are part of this mission now. I'm not leaving you on this mountain. The silence stretched, then quietly 11. Mercer blinked. Say again. 11, Ward said, not 9. There were 2 approaching the eastern wall during your breach that you didn't have eyes on. I removed them before they reached a firing position. Mercer stared at the compound wall. 11 engagements in a single operation, across distances that range from 1,400 to over 2,100 meters, in fog, in the dark, alone. Ward, he said, and his voice had changed, not the tactical commander voice, something more direct than that. Come in with us. Another long pause. My kit is staged 3 kilometers up the eastern slope, she said finally. I need 40 minutes to retrieve it and reach your position. We'll be here, Mercer said immediately. Take your time. 40 minutes, she said again. Not less. We'll be here, he said again. The radio clicked off. Mercer lowered it. Brickley was watching him. She coming in 40 minutes, Mercer said. Brickley nodded slowly. Good, he said. Just that. Good. Webb from his position at the entrance. Somebody want to explain to me how one person does what she just did, because I have been trying to run the math since that first shot on the ridge, and the math keeps coming out wrong. The math isn't wrong, Reyes said. The assumptions are wrong. What assumptions? The assumption that what she did is improbable, Reyes said. He was quiet for a moment. What she did is improbable for the people we assumed were capable of it. It apparently isn't improbable for her. Torres said from the wall, she told me something. Everyone looked at him. He shifted his weight, winced, settled. When Okafor was working on my shoulder, right after she took the first shot, she leaned over and said something to me. He paused. She said, you're going to be fine. I already accounted for you. The compound was quiet for a moment. What does that mean? Webb asked. I think Torres said, it means she had already planned for what happened to me. She had already decided I wasn't going to be a casualty. He looked at his shoulder, which is a hell of a thing for someone to decide about you when they don't even know your name. Nobody had an answer to that. 0131. Mercer sat down against the compound wall across from Khalid, who was secured and silent, and watching the Americans with the focused attention of a man cataloging everything for future use. Mercer looked at him and felt nothing that wasn't professional. The man across from him had made decisions that cost lives. Now he would answer for them. That was the entirety of what Mercer felt about it. He thought about the mountain above them. He thought about 3 days, 71 hours, then more. He thought about what it was to be that alone in that terrain, with that mission, with that level of patience. He thought about the fact that Ward had known from her elevated position, from her hours of surveillance, that the SEAL unit was in danger before the SEAL unit knew it. She had watched the ambush being prepared. She had cataloged it. She had been ready. She had not fired until she absolutely had to. The discipline of that, the restraint, was in some ways more remarkable than the shooting. Because the shooting was skill, and skill, however rare, was understandable. The restraint was something else. The restraint was a choice sustained over hours to hold the potential energy of what she could do in reserve until the moment it would matter most. Mercer had met very few people in his career who truly understood the value of withholding action. Elena Ward had just given him a masterclass. He checked his watch. 1:33, 38 minutes until she walked back in from the mountain. He would wait every one of them. The fog was still thick around the compound walls, pressing and shifting in its own indifferent logic, and somewhere above in the dark, a woman was moving through it with 40 minutes of mountain between her and the team she had kept alive, retrieving the kit she had staged 3 days ago, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly where everything is, because they put everything there with exactly this in mind. The mountain held its fog. The team held its position. And Mercer held something he hadn't expected to feel after a mission like this one. Not relief, not satisfaction, not the tired professional acknowledgement of work completed. Something closer to gratitude. The specific bone-deep gratitude of a man who understands fully and without qualification that he and 5 other people are alive right now because of something that happened above them in the dark. Something they couldn't see and couldn't hear and wouldn't have believed if they hadn't watched it with their own eyes. That kind of gratitude doesn't go away. That was the kind you carry. She was 3 minutes late. Mercer noticed it at 2:11 when his watch confirmed 43 minutes had passed since Ward said 40. He did not say anything about it. He did not look at his watch a second time. He held his position at the compound entrance and kept his breathing steady and told himself that 3 minutes was nothing, that terrain in the dark and fog was unpredictable, that she had been moving for 3 days on this mountain and knew it better than anyone, and 3 minutes was absolutely nothing. But he noticed it. Brickley noticed him noticing it. That was the thing about operating with someone long enough. You started reading their silences, the way you read their words, and Brickley had been reading Mercer's silences for 6 years. She's fine, Brickley said quietly. I know, Mercer said. You're doing the thing where you don't look at your watch twice. I'm not doing anything. Commander, you're doing the thing. Mercer looked at him. Brickley looked back with the expression of a man who has earned the right to say true things to his commanding officer and knows it. She's fine, Brickley said again. At 0214, the fog at the northern compound entrance shifted and Ward walked through it. She was carrying more than when he had last seen her, a secondary pack compact and dense that she wore across her front in addition to the primary kit on her back. Her rifle was still slung. Her movement was the same as it had been on the ridge, controlled, economical, the walk of someone who has decided exactly where each foot will land before it leaves the ground. She stopped at the compound entrance and looked at Mercer. Traffic, she said. Traffic, and he repeated. Two of Khalid's men were attempting extraction via the northern trail. They had a vehicle staged at the 4-kilometer mark. She said it without drama, the way a person reports on weather. I redirected them. Webb, from his position, redirected. They won't be using that trail, Ward said. Nobody asked for clarification. She stepped inside the compound, and her eyes moved across the space the way they always moved, cataloging, assessing, building the picture. She registered Torres Okafor, Brickley, Webb, Reyes. She registered Khalid, secured in the corner. Her gaze rested on Khalid for exactly 1 second longer than it rested on anything else. And in that second, Mercer saw something move behind her eyes that was not tactical assessment. It was recognition. You know him, Mercer said. Ward looked at Mercer. I've been watching him for 6 weeks, she said, across 3 different operations. He was never close enough before. She paused. He is now. Khalid, who had maintained his silence with the determined dignity of a man who had decided silence was his last available weapon, looked at Ward with an expression that Mercer couldn't fully decode. Not fear, something more complicated than fear. The expression of a man who is recalibrating something fundamental about his understanding of the last several weeks. He knows who you are, Mercer said. He knows what I am, Ward corrected. She looked away from Khalid. He's been aware of a long-range surveillance presence for the last 2 weeks. His people couldn't locate it. She moved to a position against the eastern wall, set her secondary pack down with care. I found 3 separate search teams he sent into the high ground over the past 10 days. They never came close. Mercer stared at her. You were being actively hunted. Everyone in this kind of work is being actively hunted, she said. The question is whether they're good enough to find you. She said it without a trace of arrogance, just as observable fact. The sky is blue. Water runs downhill. Being hunted is the baseline condition of this occupation. Torres made a sound from the wall that might have been a laugh, or might have been pain, or might have been both simultaneously. 0219. Reyes, who had been working the communication equipment since the compound was secured, looked up from his gear. Commander, I have a partial window, enough to get extraction coordinates transmitted. I need to do it in the next 4 minutes or I lose the satellite angle. Do it, Mercer said. Reyes was already transmitting. His hands moved with the focused efficiency of someone working against a clock they can feel. Ward had settled against the eastern wall and opened her secondary pack. She was doing something with her equipment, methodical, organized, the way she did everything. Mercer watched her for a moment and then looked away because watching her felt like observing a private process that didn't require witnesses. Okafor appeared at his shoulder. We need to start moving toward the extraction LZ within 40 minutes. The window closes at 0430. I know. Torres is stable, but the shoulder is going to stiffen. Movement gets harder after 2 hours. We'll move in 35. Okafor nodded and went back to Torres. Mercer walked to where Ward was working and crouched beside her. He kept his voice low. I need to file a report on this operation, and I need to know what I'm authorized to include. Ward looked at him. Meaning your name, your role, the engagements. He paused. You operated outside my chain of awareness on independent classification. I don't know what I'm permitted to document. Ward was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands and back at him. My command will file separately. What you document is your operation. A pause. I wasn't officially here. 11 confirmed engagements, Mercer said. 4 on the ridge, 2 additional during the breach that I didn't know about until you told me the cluster at the western gate, the watchtower, the roof emplacement, and the 2 on the northern trail tonight. 13, Ward said quietly. Mercer stopped. 13. There was one on the eastern slope during your breach that I didn't report because the timing didn't allow for it. He had an angle on Okafor through the gap in the eastern wall. She met his eyes. I had approximately 2 seconds to decide. Mercer thought about Okafor moving through the compound breach with his kit open, focused on the team's medical status, not scanning for threats from the eastern approach. He thought about 2 seconds. He thought about a decision made at 1,500 meters in the dark and fog in under 2 seconds, with no room for error and no time to communicate, and no way for anyone in the compound to even know there was a threat until it was already resolved. You saved his life, Mercer said. I solved a problem, Ward said. That's what I was there to do. It was such a complete answer and such an incomplete one simultaneously that Mercer sat with it for a moment before responding. Thank you, he said. Not as a commander, just as a person. Ward looked at him. The flat calibrating gaze that he had learned over the past few hours was not coldness, but concentration, the look of someone whose attention is always doing something. You're welcome, she said. And for the first time since she had stepped out of the fog on the ridge, the words carried something personal in them. Something that was not tactical data. 0227. Reyes's voice cut across the compound. Transmission confirmed. Extraction window is locked. LZ is 2.4 kilometers northeast extraction in 93 minutes. Mercer stood. Start staging. We move in 30. The compound organized itself, the specific practiced efficiency of a unit that has completed the acute phase of a mission and is transitioning to extraction. Khalid was moved to the center of the formation, secured unresisting. Torres got to his feet with assistance from Webb, who did it with the matter-of-fact practicality of a man who has helped injured teammates walk out of bad situations before and will probably do it again. Brickley consolidated the heavy equipment. Okafor did his final check on every member of the team, a quiet inventory of the things that matter when people have been doing dangerous work in the dark. Ward repacked her secondary kit. Mercer watched her movements and recognized something in them. The careful, specific way she packed told him this equipment was irreplaceable or classified, or both, and that she had strong opinions about how it was handled. She was telling him things about herself through the way she managed her gear, and the things she was telling him built a picture he found himself wanting to understand better. 0238. Talk to me, Mercer said to her as the team staged near the compound entrance. Off the record, what was the hardest shot tonight? Ward looked at him. Something in the question seemed to interest her, not the tactical content of it, but the fact that he had asked it that way. The third shooter on the ridge, she said after a moment. Not the longest shot. No, the longest was technically harder, but the variable set was smaller. The third shooter had moved twice between my acquisitions of him. I was working from pattern prediction, not direct observation. She paused. I had a 61% confidence on his final position. Mercer stared at her. 61%. It was sufficient. You fired on 61% confidence at 2,100 meters. The alternative was letting him continue to control the ridge. She looked at him steadily. What would you have done? Mercer thought about it honestly, which she deserved. The same thing, he said. Yes, she said. You would have. Brickley, who had been close enough to hear, turned away and did something with his face that he probably didn't intend to be visible. Webb looked at Torres, and Torres looked at Webb, and something passed between them that was entirely nonverbal. 0241. They moved out. The extraction route took them northeast away from the compound through a section of terrain that Ward, without being asked, positioned herself to cover from the elevated left flank. Nobody assigned her that role. She identified it, occupied it, and began working it with the same automatic authority she brought to everything else. Mercer noticed. He noticed and said nothing because there was nothing to say. She had assessed the route, identified the vulnerability, and moved to address it. Pointing it out would have been the same as explaining to a musician which notes went in the chord. For 20 minutes they moved in good order. Then Reyes said quietly but distinctly, "Commander, problem." Mercer moved up to him. Reyes was holding his navigation equipment, and his expression was the specific expression of someone whose numbers don't match their expectations and who has checked them twice already. "The LZ," he said quietly. "It's occupied." "What?" I'm picking up thermal signatures at the designated extraction point, multiple, and they're not our people. Extraction team isn't due for another 70 minutes. Mercer processed this in the space of 2 seconds. The extraction point was compromised, which meant either their communication had been intercepted, possible given the degraded signal conditions they'd been working with all night, or someone had anticipated the extraction route through different means. How many signatures, he asked. At least 6, possibly more behind the terrain feature on the east side. Ward, Mercer said into the radio. She came back immediately. I heard, I'm already looking. A pause that lasted 8 seconds. 8 hostiles, she said, staged in a modified ambush configuration around the LZ perimeter. They've been there for at least 30 minutes. Their positions are settled. This was planned. A pause with weight in it. This wasn't a response to tonight's operation. They had another team staged independently. The information arrived in Mercer's understanding and rearranged several things simultaneously. Khalid had a contingency, a separate, independently deployed contingency that didn't rely on the compound's security infrastructure. A team staged at the extraction point that would have been there regardless of what happened at the compound, because whoever planned this had considered the possibility that the compound might fall and had arranged for the people who walked away from it to walk into something else. It was well constructed, if Ward hadn't been watching. Talk to me about our options, Mercer said. Alternate LZ, she said. There's terrain that works approximately 1.8 kilometers north-northwest. The problem is your extraction window rerouting adds 20 minutes and you'll need to communicate the LZ change, which requires signal quality you may not have. What's option 2? A pause. I clear the LZ. Mercer let that land. 8 hostiles. At an LZ. From an elevated position in the darkened fog with his team unable to support and the compound operation already having demanded 13 separate engagements in the previous 2 hours. Ward, he said. I know what I said, she answered before he could finish the thought. It's 8 targets in a defended position. Yes. That's not overwatch support. That's a direct assault from a single position. Technically, it's precision interdiction from an elevated platform. Ward. Commander. Her voice didn't shift. I've been looking at this LZ for 4 minutes. The ambush team made the same mistake your ridge operators made. They think distance protects them. A pause. Distance is my environment, not theirs. Mercer looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back at him. Mercer looked at the direction of the LZ, which he couldn't see, but which his mind had mapped from the coordinates in the terrain they had been moving through. He thought about every possible version of the next 30 minutes. He thought about the alternate LZ 1.8 kilometers north-northwest, 20 additional minutes degraded communication, Taurus's shoulder stiffening, extraction, window tightening to its absolute limit. He thought about 8 hostiles at the designated LZ who had been waiting there for 30 minutes in the cold, in the fog, completely confident in their ambush, completely unaware that the thing they were waiting to ambush included a woman with a rifle who had just worked for 3 hours straight in these exact conditions and whose understanding of what was possible had already been demonstrated at length to be significantly wider than theirs. How long do you need, he asked. 12 minutes, Ward said. Hold position. Do not approach the LZ until I tell you. Understood, he paused. Ward. Yeah. Be careful. Another pause, shorter than the others. That's why it takes 12 minutes instead of 8, she said. The radio clicked off. 0258, 12 minutes. The team held in cover 200 meters from the compromised LZ in the fog and dark of a mountain that was still indifferent to all of them, that would be indifferent long after all of them were gone. Khalid sat in the center of their formation, secured, and for the first time since his capture, he looked something other than composed. He was looking in the direction of the LZ with an expression that Mercer could now read. He was waiting for his contingency to activate. He believed his staged team at the LZ was going to save him. That was what the expression was. Not fear, anticipation. The belief that the thing he had arranged, the backup plan that no one was supposed to know about, was still operational. That when the Americans reached the extraction point, they would walk into 8 men waiting for them and the situation would reverse and he would be going home. Mercer looked at him. He did not say anything to Khalid. There was nothing to say that events wouldn't say better. 304. 6 minutes in. Torres shifted his weight and Okafor steadied him with a hand. "How are you doing?" Okafor said quietly. "Shoulders stiffening," Torres said. "Like you said, I can still move." "I know you can." "Whatever she's doing up there," Torres said, looking toward the LZ. "I hope it's going well." "It's going well," Okafor said. "How do you know?" Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Because nothing has gone wrong for her yet tonight, and I don't think that's luck." Torres considered this. Then he nodded slowly, the single nod of a man who has arrived at a conclusion through pain and fatigue, and the evidence of his own eyes, and found it to be sufficient. 0308. A sound. Distant, compressed by the fatigue and the distance and the mountain acoustics into something that was more felt than heard, the way deep sounds sometimes travel not through the air, but through the ground, through the soles of boots, up through bones. Then another sound, then a third, then two more in quick succession. Then quiet, a quiet so complete and so immediate that it had texture. Brickley, who had been watching in the direction of the sounds with his rifle held in both hands, lowered it slowly. He and Mercer looked at each other. 0309. Ward's voice on the radio, "LZ is clear, 8 confirmed. You can approach." A pause. "Watch the Eastern Terrain feature. There's a 9th that I didn't see until he moved at the sound. He's down, but I want you to visually confirm." 9th. A 9th hostile who hadn't appeared in the thermal signatures, who had been invisible until the sound of Ward's engagement drew a response from him, a shift, a movement, a moment of giving himself away, and who had then been dealt with in that same moment. "Confirmed," Mercer said. "We're moving." The team moved to the LZ. What they found there was what happened when someone with Ward's specific capability turned their attention to an ambush that was designed by people who had never encountered that capability. 8 positions, 8 operators, a well-structured defensive setup that would have been devastatingly effective against the team it was waiting for. It was not effective against what had been waiting for it. Khalid, when he saw the LZ, went very still. The anticipation in his expression drained away like water leaving a bowl. What replaced it was not surrender. Men like Khalid didn't do surrender as an emotional state, only as a tactical position. What replaced it was the expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the last several hours, about who had been on this mountain, about what had been watching. Mercer watched him process it. He watched the moment when Khalid understood that his contingency had not failed because of the SEAL team. It had failed because of something else, something that had been on this mountain for 3 days, something he had sent search teams to find and had never found. Khalid looked at Mercer. "Who is she?" he said. The first words he had spoken since his capture. Mercer looked at him for a moment. "Someone you should have taken more seriously," he said. March 17th, Ward came in from the north. She moved through the LZ perimeter the way she moved through everything without announcement already there. When the team registered her presence, the fog releasing her from its keeping with the same indifferent ease with which it had accepted her. She was breathing harder than she had been at the compound. Not labored, nothing about her suggested labored, but controlled the breathing of someone who had been moving fast through difficult terrain and was managing the physiology of it with practiced attention. She scanned the team. Torres, Mercer, Brickley, Webb, Reyes, Okafor. One count complete, efficient. "Everyone's here," she said. "Everyone's here," Mercer confirmed. Something moved in her face. It was brief and it was small. And if Mercer had been watching anywhere other than directly at her, he would have missed it. But he was watching directly at her, and he saw it. Relief, actual human unguarded relief. The expression of someone who has been carrying the weight of other people's survival through a windy and complicated night and has just confirmed that the weight came out on the right side. It was there for maybe 2 seconds. Then she was back to operational. "Extraction team," she asked. 51 minutes, Reyes said. She nodded. She moved to a position that covered the northern approach and settled into it the way she settled into all positions, immediately, completely, as if she had always been there. Mercer sat down for the first time in what felt like several years, put his back against a rock, and looked up at the fog above them and thought about 51 minutes and the particular quality of almost being done with something. Webb appeared and sat beside him. Not to say anything, just to sit. The companionship of shared endurance, which requires no words and offers more comfort than most words will provide. After a moment, Webb said quietly, 9 at the LZ. 9, Mercer confirmed. On top of the ridge, on top of the compound. Webb paused. Commander, do you understand what she did tonight? I'm starting to, Mercer said. 22 engagements, Webb said, and our team has 0 KIA and 1 WIA who's walking. Mercer didn't answer. The number sat between them in the fog. 22 engagements across a single operation. Distances ranging from 1,400 to over 2,100 meters. In fog, in the dark, in conditions that the manuals described as severely degraded. By one person, lone. Brickley's voice came from across the LZ perimeter. Extraction plus 12 minutes. Birds ahead of schedule. Mercer looked at his watch. 0324. He looked at Ward motionless at the northern position, watching the approach still working, still on. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who doesn't stop until everyone is home. Not everyone had that. Very few people had it. The ones who did, you didn't forget them. Not ever. March 31st. The sound of the extraction aircraft came through the fog before the aircraft was visible. The deep rotation of rotors in the mountain air. The sound that meant the night was almost over. Mercer was on his feet before it fully resolved, his team already forming up around Khalid Torres, supported on Webb's right side, everyone moving toward the sound with the collective forward momentum of people who have been through something hard and can see the end of it. Ward moved with them, not separately, with them. In their formation on the left flank, her rifle slung and her attention still working the northern approach until the aircraft was close enough that the northern approach ceased to be a meaningful variable. When the helicopter settled, the team moved to it with discipline and speed. Khalid first secured managed mission objective delivered. Torres next with Webb. Brickley, Okafor, Reyes. Ward moved aboard. Mercer caught her arm, not rough, just a hand on her arm, stopping her for 1 second. She looked at him. Whatever they have you doing next, he said. Whoever you're protecting next. He paused. I hope they know what they have. Ward looked at him for a moment. They never do, she said quietly. Then she stepped onto the aircraft. Mercer followed her. The helicopter lifted. The mountain fell away below them. The compound, the ridge, the fog, 71 hours of stillness and patience and mathematics done in the dark by a woman who had been there before any of them arrived, and would have been fine if none of them ever showed up. The mountain fell away and the fog swallowed it, and then there was only the dark above, and the aircraft, and the sound of the rotors, and the weight of a very long night in the bones of 6 men who were all improbably, completely, unmistakably alive. Torres, from his position across the aircraft, caught Ward's eye. He held it for a moment. Then he nodded once. She nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. Some things live below language in the territory where the body understands things the mind is still catching up to. Torres had been the first one hit, and she had said she had already accounted for him, and he had spent the rest of the night watching her make that true, and now they were both on this aircraft, and the mountain was behind them, and the night was behind them, and he was going to need surgery in about 6 hours, but he was going to need it alive, which was the kind of surgery worth having. He leaned his head back. He closed his eyes. The helicopter moved through the dark, and below them, the mountain held its fog. The debrief began at 6 o'clock. Not because anyone had slept. Nobody had slept. The helicopter had landed at the forward operating base at 0417. Torres had been in surgery prep by 0435, and the remaining members of Mercer's team had spent the intervening time doing the things that people do in the immediate aftermath of a completed mission. Equipment checks, medical evaluations, the quiet and slightly disoriented process of transitioning from a state of sustained high alert back to something that resembled a normal human physiological baseline. It was a transition that never happened as cleanly as the manual suggested it should, and everyone in special operations knew it, and nobody talked about it much. Ward had disappeared at 4:22, not dramatically, not with announcement. One moment she was moving through the base with her kit, and then she was in a separate building with a separate command structure, and a door that was closed, and a conversation that Mercer was not part of and was not going to be part of. He understood this. He had understood it since the ridge, since she told him her extraction parameters were separate from his operation. She belonged to a different architecture of command and accountability, and that architecture had its own procedures, and those procedures did not include him. He understood it, and he did not entirely like it. He sat in the debrief room, a spare functional space that smelled of coffee that had been heated too many times with Reyes and Webb and Brickley and Okafor, and across from them sat Colonel James Hartwell, the commanding officer of the forward operating base, and two intelligence analysts whose names Mercer had been given, but had not retained because he was running on 3 hours of fragmented sleep spread across the last 48 hours, and his retention capacity was operating at a reduced but functional level. Hartwell was 60 years old and had the face of a man who had spent those years absorbing information that he would have preferred not to know. He had read the preliminary mission report, the compressed version that Reyes had transmitted during the narrow satellite window, and he had read it twice, and then he had sat with it for a moment before walking into this room, and the sitting with it was visible in the particular quality of his attention. "Walk me through it," Hartwell said. Mercer walked him through it. He was precise and sequential the way good after-action reporting requires timeline, context, decisions, outcomes. He described the ridge ambush, Ward's appearance, the 3 engagements on the ridge, the 4th hostile on the southern slope, the compound breach, the overwatch support, the LZ ambush, the 9 engagements at the extraction point. He was factual and unembellished, and he used the language of operational reporting, which is a language specifically designed to communicate maximum information in minimum words with minimum emotional content. He got to the end of it and stopped. Hartwell looked at him. 22 confirmed engagements, Hartwell said. 22, Mercer confirmed. Single operator. Single operator. Distances ranging from 1,400 to 2,100 plus meters. Correct. Hartwell looked at the two intelligence analysts. The analysts looked at each other. The look they exchanged was the look of people who process information for a living, encountering information that temporarily exceeds their processing framework. One of them, the younger one, a woman named Chen, who Mercer had now decided to retain the name of, said the LZ ambush. 9 hostiles. How long did the engagement take? From the first shot to the radio confirmation, approximately 11 minutes, Mercer said. Chen wrote something down. She wrote it slowly with the deliberateness of someone who wants to make sure the writing accurately captures the thing that was just said. 9 targets in 11 minutes, she said, at an LZ perimeter, in fog. Yes, Mercer said. Hartwell leaned back in his chair. It was a chair that had been leaned back in many times before and had developed an opinion about the motion expressing it in a faint creak. Where is she now? Separate debrief, Mercer said. Separate command. Who's running her? Mercer looked at him steadily. Colonel, I don't know. I was never given that information and I didn't ask for it. But she identified herself. Captain Elena Ward, yes. Hartwell looked at the ceiling for a moment. Not in the way of someone who has lost the thread of the conversation, but in the way of someone running calculations that require a slightly wider field of view than the room provides. 0634. The door opened, not knocked. Opened with the specific confidence of someone who has already decided that the room on the other side of the door is a room they're entitled to enter. A man Mercer did not recognize stepped in. He was perhaps 55 compact, with the build of someone who had been physically capable for a long time and had maintained it, with the quiet discipline of someone for whom it was simply a professional requirement rather than a point of pride. He wore the kind of clothes that were deliberately nondescript, and he had the kind of face that was deliberately unremarkable. And Mercer, who had spent 18 years developing the ability to read. People read this man as someone who had put significant effort into being unreadable. He looked at Hartwell. Colonel, he said. Hartwell straightened. Mr. Carson. Carson, no rank, no title. Just Carson the way people are, sometimes just one word when the other words are either classified or irrelevant. Carson looked at Mercer. He looked at the team. He looked at the intelligence analysts with the particular look of someone who outranks everyone in the room and wants them to know it without having to say it. I need 5 minutes with your team, Colonel, he said to Hartwell. Hartwell stood. The analysts stood. They left the room with the efficiency of people who have been in the vicinity of Carson before and understand the protocol. The door closed. Carson sat down in Hartwell's vacated chair and looked at Mercer with an attention that was absolute and undecorated. Captain Ward's operational record is classified at a level that most people in this building don't have access to, he said. I'm going to tell you some things about her that I'm telling you because your team has a right to understand who helped keep them alive last night. Not because it's standard procedure. It isn't. Mercer said nothing. Around him, his team was very still. She has been deployed 17 times in the last 4 years, Carson said. Each deployment has been independent long-range overwatch. She operates alone, she deploys alone, and she extracts alone. Last night was the first time in 4 years that she has made direct contact with any unit she was supporting. Brickley said quietly, "She came out because we needed her." Carson looked at him. "Yes. She broke her protocol for us. She made a judgment call," Carson said, "which is what she does, which is why she has the access she has." He paused. In 17 deployments, she has never lost a unit she was covering. Not one. The room absorbed this. Not one. Mercer thought about the ridge. He thought about the first shot, the 2,000 meters, the fog, the 3.1 seconds. He thought about the 13 engagements during the compound operation, the 9 at the LZ, the woman who had told him she had already accounted for Torres before Torres had even been hit, in a way that suggested she had modeled the entire night before it happened and found a version of it where everyone came home. Not one. 17 deployments. Not one lost unit. "Where is she now?" Mercer asked. "She's been reassigned," Carson said. Something moved in Mercer's chest, not dramatic, just a shift the way things shift when you receive information you didn't want but were probably expecting. "When?" he asked. "Orders came through at 0530, Carson said. "She was wheels up at 0610. Mercer looked at his watch. 0639. She had been gone for 29 minutes. No goodbye, no debriefing with his team, no moment of acknowledgement from a unit whose lives she had spent the night keeping intact. She had sat in her separate debrief, received her new orders, and left the way she did everything without announcement, without ceremony, without asking anyone's permission. Webb said she didn't say anything. "No," Carson said, "she just left." "That's how she operates," Carson said. He said it without judgment, as plain description. "She's not built for the afterward. She's built for the during." Brickley made a sound that was not a word. Then he said, "That's not right." Carson looked at him. "No," he said simply, "it isn't." The honesty of it was unexpected enough that it shifted the temperature of the room slightly. 0652. Carson was gone 10 minutes later, as efficiently as he had arrived, leaving behind a room full of men who were processing several things simultaneously and doing it in the specific silence of people who have learned to do their processing internally. Mercer sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the space where Carson had been sitting. Torres was in surgery. He would be fine. The surgical team had confirmed stable vital signs before the debrief started. He would need weeks of recovery, but he would have full function, and he would come back because Torres was the kind of person who comes back. Ward was on an aircraft somewhere, going somewhere, to another mountain probably, to another 3 days alone in high terrain above a unit that wouldn't know she was there, watching something that needed watching, existing like the terrain itself, right up until the moment when someone needed her to exist differently. Not one lost unit, 17 times. Mercer thought about the things she had said to Torres. "I already accounted for you." He thought about what it meant to account for people you had never met, to factor their survival into your planning, before you knew their names, to carry the weight of strangers through a long night, and then leave without waiting for them to understand what you had carried. He thought about what it cost to do that. Not once. 17 times. He stood up. "Okafor," he said. Okafor looked at him. "Go check on Torres. Tell him what happened with Ward. He deserves to know." Okafor nodded and left. "Reyes," Mercer said, "I need the full mission log documented before the end of today. Every engagement, every timing, every confirmed distance, everything." He paused. "I want it accurate. I want it complete." Reyes understood something in the instruction that went beyond standard documentation requirements. "You want a record of what she did. I want the record to be honest about who did what." Mercer said. Reyes nodded. "I'll have it done by 1400. Webb, Brickley, get some sleep." He looked at both of them. "That's an order." Webb said, "Yes, sir." He said it with the tone of a man who probably wasn't going to sleep, but was willing to make the attempt. Brickley said nothing. He stood, and on his way out of the room, he stopped at the door and stood there for a moment with his hand on the frame, looking at something that wasn't in the room. "Commander," he said without turning. "Yeah. Next time somebody tells me what the maximum effective range of a rifle is," he said, I'm going to think about last night before I answer. Then he left. Mercer sat alone in the room for a while. August 15th. He was still at the base when the intelligence report came through a preliminary assessment from the compound operation compiled by the analysts, from the physical evidence, and the communications intercepts that Reyes had captured during the mission. Hartwell brought it to him personally, which told Mercer something about its content before he read a single word. He read it, then he read it again. The compound operation had not simply eliminated Hassan Khalid. Khalid, in the chaos of the compound's final minutes in the confusion and disruption caused by Ward's rapid sequential elimination of 3 key defensive positions, had attempted to destroy a communications archive he maintained in the reinforced interior room. He had not had time to complete the destruction. The archive, largely intact, had been recovered by Mercer's team during the breach without anyone understanding what they were recovering. The archive contained operational communications spanning 14 months, names, networks, planned operations in 4 countries. The kind of intelligence that analysts described in careful professional language as significant. The kind that would take months to fully process and years to fully act on. The kind that changed things. Hartwell sat across from him while he read. When Mercer looked up, Hartwell said, "The archive is the reason the mission existed." "I know," Mercer said. "We didn't know the archive was physically present. We thought it was distributed electronically across multiple secure servers." Hartwell paused. Khalid was old-fashioned. He didn't trust digital security. He kept physical records. And the only reason we got to them was because the compound fell fast enough that he didn't have time to destroy them, Mercer said. "Yes. And the compound fell fast enough because of how the breach was supported." "Yes," Hartwell said again. Mercer sat with this, the cascading architecture of consequence. Ward had cleared the ridge, which enabled the advance, which opened the breach window, which collapsed the compound's internal coherence fast enough to prevent archive destruction, which recovered intelligence that would reshape operations across 4 countries for years. 1 person, 3 days on a mountain, 17 deployments, not 1 lost unit. "She doesn't know this," Mercer said. "She knows what she did," Hartwell said carefully. "Whether she knows the downstream consequence of it." He paused. "People in her position rarely do. The compartmentalization that protects them also keeps them from seeing the full picture of what their work produces." Mercer thought about this for a long time. He thought about a woman on an aircraft right now heading toward another mountain, another mission, another 3 days of stillness and patience, and the weight of strangers she would never meet but had already decided to keep alive. He thought about her sitting in that aircraft knowing only what she knew, the shots, the distances, the team that was intact when the helicopter lifted. She didn't know about the archive. She didn't know that what she had made possible tonight went wider and deeper than a single mission in a single mountain range. She just did the go and got on the plane. 8:44. Torres came out of surgery at 9:12. Mercer was there when they had brought him out. He had walked to the medical unit at some point without being entirely conscious of deciding to do it the way the body sometimes moves toward things. It has decided are important before the mind has fully signed off on the decision. Torres was groggy and pale and had the slightly unfocused look of a person whose body has been doing significant work under anesthesia and is now accounting for that work. But his eyes when they found Mercer were clear enough. "Commander," he said. His voice was thick. "Torres. Mission report." "Complete," Mercer said. "Khalid is in custody. Archive recovered. Team intact." Torres processed this with the slow deliberateness of the anesthesia adjacent. Then he said, "All I had a ward." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "She's gone," he said. "New assignment. She was wheels up before 6. Torres looked at the ceiling. He looked at it for long enough that Mercer thought he might be falling back into the post-surgical fog. Then he said, "She told me I was going to be fine." "I know." Before she even knew if she could help us. Before she even knew if the mission was going to work. Torres' voice was quiet and very direct. "She told me I was going to be fine, like it was already decided." "Yes," Mercer said. "That's not normal." "No," Mercer said. "It isn't." Torres closed his eyes. For a moment, his breathing settled into the slow pattern of someone descending back towards sleep. Then, without opening his eyes, he said, "I hope she's okay." It was such a simple thing to say. Such a human thing stripped of all the operational language and tactical framing and professional distance. A man who had been shot, who had been held up by his teammate through a mountain breach, who had watched the most extraordinary marksmanship any of them had ever witnessed, who had then learned the person responsible was already gone, and what he said about it was, "I hope she's okay." Mercer sat beside the bed. "Me too," he said. September 31st. 3 weeks later, Mercer was assigned to a joint planning session at a facility he had been to twice before and would not describe in any document. The session covered operational responses to the intelligence recovered from Khalid's archive. There were people in the room from several branches of the military and several agencies whose names were either well-known or not publicly known at all, depending on which part of the room you were looking at. He did not expect to hear Ward's name. He was wrong. Midway through the second hour, one of the senior analysts referenced a recent operation in support of a joint task force. An independent long-range overwatch asset had supported a 3-day surveillance operation in a terrain environment described only by its elevation and its geographic region. The asset had provided 17 confirmed data points that had directly enabled the disruption of 2 planned operations identified from Khalid's archive. No casualties in the supported unit. The asset had operated independently throughout. No name was given in the briefing document, but Mercer knew. He knew the way you know things that you've seen with your own eyes and processed with your own nervous system, the way you know things that have rearranged something in your understanding of what people are capable of. He knew the way you know the signature of something rare when you've encountered it, once you don't need to see it labeled. You recognize the shape. He looked at the briefing document. He looked at the clean institutional language that described 17 data points in 2 disrupted operations and a supported unit with no casualties. He thought about a woman on a mountain. He thought about the fog. He thought about what it means to be the kind of person who is always already in position, always already accounting for strangers, always already carrying weight that nobody around you can see. He thought about her stepping out of the fog on that ridge with her rifle slung and her eyes already tracking angles and saying in a voice that contained no doubt whatsoever, "I've got the distance, 1017. 2 months after the mission, Mercer was asked to speak to a group of junior officers about long-range operational support. He prepared remarks which he did not ultimately use because when he stood in front of the room and looked at the faces looking back at him, young, capable, not yet worn down to their essential components, by the specific gravity of sustained operational work, he set the notes aside and said something different. He talked about the ridge. He talked about what it felt like to be in a situation that exceeded the parameters of his unit's capability, and to understand it and to have to sit with that understanding in real time while his team was taking fire. He talked about the specific quality of help that arrives from an unexpected direction, not rescue, because rescue implies helplessness, and that wasn't what it was. It was something more like completion. The arrival of the piece that was always supposed to be there, fitting into the situation so cleanly that afterward you couldn't quite reconstruct how you had ever imagined functioning without it. He talked about what he had watched Ward do. He did not use her name. He was not authorized to use her name. He described her the way the debrief documents described her, as an independent overwatch asset, a long-range precision operator, a support element deployed outside conventional unit awareness. One of the junior officers near the back raised a hand. "Sir," he said, "with respect, what you're describing sounds like it might not be possible. The distances, the conditions, the number of engagements." Mercer looked at him. He thought about 3.1 seconds of silence on a mountain. He thought about, "I already accounted for you." He thought about not one lost unit in 17 deployments, and about a woman on an aircraft who didn't know that her work had produced consequences that would run for years, who had simply gotten on the plane and gone to the next mountain. He looked at the junior officer. Before that night, Mercer said, "Usam, I would have agreed with you." He let that sit in the room for a moment. "The limits of what's possible in this work are not fixed," he said. "They move. They get pushed by people who are willing to sit with the problem long enough and quietly enough and patiently enough to find the solution that lives past the edge of what the rest of us thought we could reach." He paused. "I've met exactly one person who understood this the way it needs to be understood. One person who had genuinely internalized it all the way down, so that it wasn't philosophy for her, it was just how she worked." The room was quiet. "What happened to her?" the junior officer asked. Mercer thought about the aircraft at 0610. He thought about the next mountain, the next 3 days, the next unit that wouldn't know she was there until she stepped out of the fog because they needed her. He thought about the name that had started circulating quietly in the specific networks where these things circulate, the name that enemy forces had arrived at through pattern recognition, through the accumulation of data points that didn't add up to anything conventional, through the experience of watching key personnel simply stop being present without warning or detectable cause. The fog. Because she appeared without warning. Because she disappeared without trace. Because she was there before anyone knew to look for her, and she was doing the work before anyone knew the work needed doing, and she was already gone by the time anyone thought to say thank you. She's still out there, Mercer said. He said it with certainty because it was certain. Not hope, not inference. Certainty, the kind built from the evidence of his own eyes and the specific nature of the person he had encountered on that mountain. She's still out there, he said again, and somewhere right now there is a unit that doesn't know she's watching, that is going to encounter a situation that exceeds their parameters, and they are going to be okay. They are going to be okay because she is already in position. She is already accounting for them. She has already done the mathematics of their survival, and the answer came out right, and she is not going to leave until she is certain of it. He looked at the room. That is what elite performance actually looks like, he said. Not the shot, the patience before the shot, not the outcome, the 3 days of stillness that made the outcome possible, not the moment everyone sees, the 71 hours of invisible work that nobody will ever put in a headline. He picked up his notes from the podium. He did not look at them. The limits, he said, were never the weapon. They were the assumption. And she burned that assumption down on a mountain in the fog alone before any of us even arrived. He looked at the room one last time. Remember that, he said. Remember what's possible when someone refuses to accept the ceiling. He stepped back from the podium. The room was still. And somewhere on a mountain that existed in no briefing document and appeared on no public map at an elevation where the air was thin and the silence was different, and the fog moved in its own logic across terrain that did not care who you were or what you had done or how long you had been waiting, and where in all of that, a woman was still, eye to scope, watching, waiting for the exact moment when mathematics, impatience, and precision aligned. Already in position, already certain, already there,